I think a lot of times, just based on what we're talking about now, people, they don't love themselves fully. They only love like the good parts. How can somebody start to transcend that?
By understanding what love is, right? Love has sort of got this Hollywood connotation of you complete me and all the romance, which is beautiful. I love love. But what I realized is love makes space for all of it, right? So it's when people say, oh, self love, love yourself, it gets so misunderstood as though you're supposed to be going to the spa once a week and getting manicures and, getting massages. And that's all self love, or run yourself a bath with candles and listen to a meditation. That's all great. There's nothing wrong with that. But to me, real love is a little bit more fierce because it's big enough to make space for the parts of us that we don't love, right? Which sounds counterintuitive or paradoxical, but real love is like a parent to a child who, of course, they love the sweetness of when their child falls asleep and they see the innocence of them just in this dream state where, oh my God, my child is so beautiful. Or they love it when they bring them a drawing that, you can barely tell what it is, but it's the intention the child did something for you. Or they love them when they're laughing and they're having fun. But a real parent who's coming from unconditional love also makes space for when their child is having a tantrum, when the child is being a freaking pain in, when the child is sulking, when the child is saying, I hate you, so that's real love, is to actually be big enough that we can hold all of it as the container for somebody to show up with every expression of who they are as a human being. To do that for oneself is not easy, but it is such a gift, because then if you can hold all parts of you, you at least give someone else the opportunity to do the same. And you certainly extend that to other people, which I would say is the greatest gift you could give another human being, which is allow them to be all of who they are.
And so taking this one step further, I don't know if this is the exact quote you shared earlier, but I've heard you talk about this before, in that like the relationships we have in our life in a way reflect the parts of us, the version of us that aren't healed, right? Like why does that happen? Like what is our body and mind kind of doing on a daily basis that would cause us to attract people like that?
Well, from Peter Crone's perspective, because that's the whole intention of being here on planet Earth in this dimension as a human being, is to transcend and break free from the constraints with which we arrived, right? If we want to get poetic again, it's like the gods are like, okay, you're a beautiful soul, but you're still bound in these feelings of inadequacy and security. We've got just the place for you. It's called planet Earth because it's a show and you're going to get triggered left, right, and center. And so that's the place where you can work out all of the stuff that's still, confining you, right? So that to me is the raison d'etre of being human. It's not to amass more money, get married, have kids, get a bigger home, and hopefully, make a ton of cash. It's actually to break free. That to me is the purpose of what it is to be human, is to dissolve, discover the constraints, the prisons that are wrapped around the limitless, boundless, timeless being that we are, so that we can return to our divine state, which is all of it. And most people do the opposite, right? They avoid through escapisms of, whatever it is, alcohol, nicotine, weed, medication, street drugs, sex, TV, food, to avoid the pain and the fear and the suffering, when in fact for me, the most powerful human being who's willing to lean into it and go, okay, like if I'm going to be powerful and free, I've got to be able to look at the things that currently confine me, because that's my project here on planet Earth, is ultimately why I call my product freedom, is to break free and find freedom in all areas of your life.
Have you worked with anybody specifically that was like knee deep in addiction, like drug addiction?
Knee deep is going to be interpreted based on whoever's listening. I would say I've worked with somebody who's pretty attached to their addiction. I think most people who are really in it are just in it, right? Like they're not really seeking help. I think if someone came to like a Peter Crone or a therapist, psychiatrist, coach, or anyone who's going to facilitate, they can't be really in the depths of the despair of an addiction. I think they're familiar with it. They know that they have it, but maybe there's a certain degree of manageability about it. So the people that I've helped typically are more than anything scared that they might relapse or get deeper into it again. They might still be using whatever their substance of choice is. But I can't say like I'm picking up a crack addict from the streets, and transforming their life. I don't think they're interested. They're just waiting for the next hit.
So it's more about working with somebody that is optimistic and has accountability and responsibility and this desire to want to get better.
Yeah, somebody who's proactively wanting to make a change. I think you have to start with that with any arena, whether it's their health, their addictions, their relationships, their finances. Yeah, it has to be a co-creation, especially if I'm going to help. I consider myself to be pretty adept at what I do, and powerful in the way that I can help people really shift perspectives. But I ain't no wizard. I can't do it without their help.
And what are some of the big perspective shifts you have people who are recovering from addiction that are wanting to get help? Like what do they need help with the most?
Gosh, it runs the gamut. Usually it's a pretty darker version of some negation, like I was talking about, like somebody might not be not good enough. It would be the darker version of that is like, I'm bad. Like I'm just a bad person. Because see, if you look at it energetically, if somebody thinks they're not good enough, they're sort of somewhat being informed by the thing they want, which is to be good. I'm just not good enough. So it tends to inspire someone to become a people pleaser, a perfectionist, or work harder. But if somebody is something negative, like I'm bad, I'm trash, I'm worthless, it has a little bit more gravity and, to your point earlier, a little bit more truth for that person, because they're like, well, see, I was kicked out of my family and I was the black sheep of the family. And so they've got real evidence as to leaning into the derogatory way of defining themselves versus trying to compensate for the more positive way of defining ourselves. So usually we have to look at that first and undo that. Like I was saying, if I'm going to redesign someone's in their house, I've got to remove all the mold and that's in there, which would be this derogatory narrative. One of the most powerful things actually for addiction is community. If you think about it from a very physiological point of view, we as human beings, we want a sense of belonging, which we could say is a way that we bond with one another. This is why I love love, right? It's where we connect, we commune. And so, what I find to be sort of present almost 100% of the time with people who struggle with addiction is a feeling of isolation, a feeling of separation. And so, they find bonding with a substance. So, to have great community, people who generally love them, we tend to dismiss and shame people who are drug addicts, right? Which is only further leveraging and in kind of exacerbating that feel of isolation and separation. So actually, it's sort of embracing, it's loving, right? So for me, I come from such a deep sense of true love and compassion for somebody who's going through that, so that they can find solace bonding with me at least, and they feel a connection. Because when we have established connections with other human beings, we tend not to want to sabotage our life because we're committed to maintaining the vitality, the joy, and the health of those relationships. But if I'm isolated, I mean, look at it in prisons, right? What's the worst thing that can happen to somebody who's incarcerated is they go into solitary confinement. And that's where the mind tends to go into entropy, and we tend to just lean into death and disorder, right? So usually there is a deep, profound sense of being alone. And this is where people have found solace, is in a substance. So if we can sort of tweak that, undo all of the feelings of inadequacy and dismissive, sort of not wanted, worthless energy, and then find a different form of bond, connection, this time with humans who actually give a shit and who care. And again, that I get it. Some of these people came from environments where there was a single parent who was a drug addict, who was an alcoholic. They didn't tend to their needs. They weren't affectionate. There was no touch. There was definitely no "I love yous." That's like foreign to people who tend towards drugs and addiction or even crime. I saw a video called "Step Inside the Circle" where somebody I actually did some work with, Fritzy, she goes and works with these inmates, and they're in a big circle, and she asks a series of questions that are, challenging questions, like, were you raised by a single parent? Was one of your parents abusive? Were one of your parents a drug addict? And if it's yes, they keep stepping inside the circle, and you start to see, holy, these human beings never stood a chance. Like, they don't even know what love is. They don't know what any sort of accolades, acknowledgments, or approval, or good boy, good girl is. Like that's foreign to them as Mandarin Chinese is to me. And so then you have a lot more compassion. So undo these derogatory, albeit self-created narratives with sometimes horrific circumstances for children, and appeal to the deeper sense of true boundless, limitless nature of someone's soul, and then reinforce it with beautiful community where people actually come from a very loving, non-judgmental place.
As somebody I've been in recovery for almost 16 years, and I've talked about this before, where I think the challenge with getting sober and getting into recovery is that this you've been using a substance for a period of time to numb all this pain, all this suffering, and make you feel good. And it works until it doesn't, right? And then now typically when people are getting sober, it's because their life is crap, right? It's not like their life's super good and they're like, oh, it's time for me to like give up the drug. It's normally something happens in a relationship, legally, etc. And then you're left in a place where you've had the substance that's been this cure for your suffering ripped away from you, and then your self-esteem and self-confidence is crap. Right. So now you're in this really weird place of like, how do you move forward? It's the same thing I think with getting out of a toxic relationship where you've been like emotionally abused, where you have this thing that there was this connection, even though it was a bad connection, while at the same time you're being abused. So your self-esteem is crap. I guess with that said, anything you do with some of the people that you work with to help them like kind of build their self-confidence from the ground up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a misnomer. You can't really build self confidence. You just have to see the lie that is creating the lack of confidence, right? So I would assert confidence is there, love is there, self worth is there, freedom is there, power is there. Like these characteristics that we try to amass or attain from the ego level, that's actually who we are at the deepest level. So again, that's why I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. So what we want to do is dissolve what is the conversation on top of all of these beautiful attributes that is the antithesis to confidence, right? I'm a piece of shit. No one cares about me. I'm trash. I'm worthless. No one loves me, right? If that's the lens we're looking through, then yeah, there's going to be the absence of confidence. So you could. That's what most people try to do is they unconsciously hold on to this limiting them based on the narrative, and then they try to compensate for it and build on top of it. Conversely, what I'm doing is no, just remove the limitation by saying it's not a truth. Is it absolutely true that you're worthless? Well, it feels that way, right? But it's not a truth that it feels that way. And well, my mum said I was a piece of shit. She didn't want me. Okay, that's one person out of 8 billion, and you just absolutely absorb that those words as though it's a truth. No, who you are as a divine being. Again, I know this gets poetic and there are real life situations to deal with here, but if you can lean into a little bit of going, okay, who am I? This is a spiritual inquiry. Am I this, meat suit? Am I Peter Crone? No, that's a sound someone gave me. My parents called me Peter. It's not who I am. It's helpful in terms of time and space. So if I walk on the street and someone says, "Hey, Peter, how you doing?" Like I can respond, But in terms of recognizing all these labels that we adopt and these conversations that define us, we want to inquire into the truth of them, and certainly those that are very derogatory or limiting. So self-confidence is there. It's called self-love, which called, I am. It's self-awareness. I exist. I'm the only me on the planet. That means I'm 1 in 8 billion. That's pretty special even if I don't do anything. I'm a unique vantage point on life, right? Doesn't mean that anyone wants to listen to it, or it doesn't mean that it's really going to get me paid, but it is nonetheless. I'm a unique aspect of life, and to me, that warrants reverence, right? And that then is confidence. Then on top of that, I'm a unique expression of life. I might have a story based on the circumstances of my childhood, which is, oh, but actually the way I view myself is I'm a piece of. Okay, well, if that's how you view yourself, you are gonna choose feelings and actions that are commensurate with that. That's gonna lead to, sort of a very unfulfilling, deleterious life. But that's not who you are. So all of this is about inquiring into, as I said earlier, the validity of the way that I've currently defined myself. I get it. I have so much compassion for why people feel worthless, and especially on the things they've experienced, from sexual abuse to physical abuse to emotional abuse. These are horrible things that any child, should never really go through. But sadly, that is the arc of someone's karma, and that's what they're here to deal with. But if we can get on the other side of the stories that you made up about it, boy, is there just an immense amount of freedom.
Other than a lot of these like mindset perspective shifts that we've been talking about throughout this conversation, is there anything else that you either do personally or you recommend people doing, like journaling or something like that, where it gets their thoughts like out on paper to kind of get them in front of them?
Yeah, that can help because it gets it out of here where it's so intimate to us, right? That we think the thoughts in our head are us. So I often do have people do that exercise, like write down how, you describe yourself, what you think about yourself, and then ideally leave it for a few hours or a day or two and come back and read it and go, holy, like if this was a friend of mine, I'd be like, dude, like you have the worst view of yourself. Like you're awesome. Like, right. So that can be powerful, enlightening, and sometimes confrontational to look at the way that we talk about ourselves, right? And then by taking it out of our head, putting it on paper, reading it as though it is literally a friend or someone you genuinely care about, you start to naturally develop a bit of compassion and go, wow, like what must it be like for that human being to walk around in that view of themselves? It's really kind of sad, and then you get inspired to maybe, just maybe, get beyond that and say, that's it's just not who I want to be. That's not how I want to live life.
One of the other things that people I think have a hard time with when they're trying to make a transformation, this goes into health transformations, goes into business, relationship, addiction, is the attachment to the transformation or the outcomes in itself, and like being present. It's hard. I mean, you've talked about the importance of being present on this show, but it's hard. It's easier said than done. Like, what advice do you have for somebody to, again, easier said than done, not be so focused on the outcome of the transformation, but instead be present in the moment, in the journey?
Yeah, it is hard. And I look at it slightly differently. Like even sports psychologists, I've worked with, probably thousands of athletes at this time, just because in baseball seasons, a couple of hundred guys sitting in a locker room in spring training, but there's so much emphasis from sports psychs of like, be present, be in the now, and be in the zone. And it's sort of instructional, right? And that's great. You want that. But why it's so difficult for people to actually achieve and attain is because it's not natural from somebody who's got a history that they are hurt by and a future that they're worried about. Then what happens is our attention tends to be dispersed in both directions, where we haven't fully accepted something, which is part of our history because of the feeling of shame or guilt or failure, disappointment, anger. And so that creates where some of our attention goes. And then that tends to, as I said, get reflected into a future where we're trying to mitigate that and avoid it being repeated. So then you've got those two things that we're holding on to whilst saying, no, but I'm going to be present. So really the access to presence is when we're not attending to the psychology of time, meaning, look, my history is what it is. I've fucked up plenty. I did what I did. I was always doing the best I could within the realm of my own awareness and my skill at the time. And I can have just so much compassion and forgiveness by myself. I've learned along the way. Hopefully today I'm a far more mature, evolved, and wise human being than I was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So for that reason, I recognize I couldn't have done anything different because I, one, didn't do anything different. And secondly, I didn't know to do anything different based on my current conditioning. Even if I knew I should have done something different, whatever the fear was that didn't allow me to do that was still stronger.
And then when it comes to like setting goals, like I think a lot of times when people are trying to make these massive changes in their life, they try to go from like 0 to 100, or they see the end goal in sight. And that again can create this unhealthy relationship with time, because now you're looking at it like, oh, I want to lose 100 pounds. Well, that's going to take forever. So I might as well not even do it. Or I want to have $1 million in the bank. It's going to take so long. Might as well not even do it. What are some best practices for goal setting, for when you're working with people to try to achieve certain things in their life so that it's manageable and they can stay on track with whatever it is they're doing?
With regards to goals, like for me, I think less is more sometimes, and especially to meet someone with their current capacity or wherever they're at in terms of their own sense of self-worth and confidence. I used to have a sign across my desk in my office that said, just do one thing, because I'm a Virgo. I love making lists. So I could have a to-do list that's like 300 things, that I've got to accomplish for my life, but it seems like I've got to do them all today. And then it becomes overwhelming. I felt oppressed and depressed. And I'm like, God, what's the point? But if I could just, and this is now a practice of mine, sure, I think it's helpful to get everything out of your head onto some sort of piece of paper or an app or whatever that you can trust where everything is located, so you don't have to hold on to it mentally, and then cherry pick, the 3 or 4 things you want to do today. So it seems very manageable. So that's a way that I feel goals become both expeditious in their realization, but also kind of fun in the process of creating them, is that this is manageable. I'm not putting immense amount of pressure on myself, and I'm still garnering the sense of achievement by keep moving forward. So I really like the attitude of less is more when it comes to goals. Like, you can have audacious goals, that's great. I have some pretty big ones, but if you stay out there, it just seems unattainable. Versus, there's a lot of people who do productivity workshops and speak to this. Like, SMART goals is an acronym people can look up. But if you can reverse engineer even your biggest goals to, okay, well, if I am to quote unquote have my own, like, retreat center in Costa Rica in a year, like, what do I have to do today? So, well, maybe I send a couple of emails to people who want to invest. I can manage that.
How important is it to stack like small wins and celebrate those when it comes to like reprogramming our subconscious mind?
I think it's very important, especially if somebody's coming from a place where they've been struggling with their self worth. Like, I think it's very easy to assimilate the things we've done and accomplished immediately, and then still focus on the horizon that we're not at. Right. So I think it's really important to give yourself the props and that sense of accomplishment and achievement for whatever it is you did, for however small of an undertaking it was. So that builds then that sense of real trust in oneself, that, like, okay, I got this. Because otherwise we can just become so future oriented and what we don't have, which again reinforces the ego's sense of scarcity or lack or inadequacy. So I think it's really important. Whatever it is that you did today, is first of all what you did today. You couldn't have done more. Why? Because you didn't. And to pat yourself on the back for whatever little thing you accomplished. And some days you'll be on fire and you're like, I got 20 things done today. That's awesome. But if the next day you only do two, well, that's two more than you might have done if you just sat around and done nothing.
How can somebody change the narrative around the coulda, shoulda, woulda like mentality? Like, I could have done more, I could have done less. Like, I could have done this differently. I heard you talk about this, I think, in the context of like you were selling somebody a domain, I think, and you met some guy at a restaurant and you were talking about he was talking about how he could have done something else. And you're like, no, you couldn't have.
Yeah, but I mean, this one to me is relatively easy because you couldn't have done anything else because you didn't. Right. And that can be confronting for the ego. It's like, wait, what did he just say? Like, well, I should have done that. I should no, but you shouldn't and you couldn't, because if you really understand the nature of life, we're just here, and whatever transpired, it's one of my most popular quotes. People even have it tattooed, is what happened happened and couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. Right. And there's so much humility to be found in that, not to mention forgiveness too. Of like, okay, like I said earlier, I did the best I could in every choice of my life based on what I knew at the time. Okay, we want to keep knowing more, hopefully evolving, becoming more mature and wise and intelligent with our choices. But whatever we did couldn't have been different because it wasn't. So it's a relatively easy question to answer. Hard maybe for people to accept and assimilate, but the facts of the facts are, they're not going to change.
Anything else you think people would find like helpful as we kind of round out our conversation as far as reprogramming the subconscious mind, transformation, mindset shifts, etc.?
Sure, I would just, maybe look at the word reprogram. I don't think it's so much a reprogram, as I said before, as a dissolution of, right? It's not so much you're trying to reprogram what's there, but rather to become aware of what's there. It's like Carl Jung had a quote that I'm probably paraphrasing a little bit, but he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. Right. So we're bringing that which is a blind spot, that which we're oblivious to, which is why we want to have compassion, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. We're all blind at, certain levels of our own consciousness and awareness. And so we want to, through being triggered in life, through hopefully the guidance of loved ones who can point out some of our characteristics that might not be our greatest assets and attributes, and then go, okay, oh wow, I can see that since I was 5, I decided or believed that I was not wanted, I wasn't loved, I wasn't good enough. And so bring that. So it's not so much reprogram that, rather bring awareness to it, investigate if it's true. And I can tell you right now, it never is. And then the next question would be, who could I be in the absence of that constraint? And that opens up an entirely new world of freedom and a sense of pure possibility.
Freedom, that's what it's all about, right? I know a big part of your work is on relationships. If you could just provide the listeners with some some of your best tips to improve the quality of their overall relationships, what would they be?
It's a great question. I would say every relationship we have with anyone resides within us. So we think we're upset at our wife, our boss, but the upset is in us. So if you want to improve your relationships to others, as trite or repetitive as it might sound, we have to improve our relationship with ourselves, right? If I can embrace my humanity, if I can find love and acceptance for the part of me that I find difficult to love and accept, then I'm going to naturally extend that to others. I'm going to be more patient. I'm going to be more forgiving. I'm going to be more accepting. So, right now, the way most relationships are kind of constructed or designed, not consciously, is that I'll be okay if you behave the way I want you to. That's not even a relationship with the other person, because you're saying, I need you to be a particular type of person for me to be okay. That's me with me, not me with you. So, first thing to realize is that most people don't have a relationship with other people. They have a relationship with their own idea of how those people should act. And once you see that, it's pretty tough to see, especially for people you love, right? You say, "Oh no, I love my wife." But when you realize actually no, you want your wife to be different, then you're not loving your wife. You're loving the idea of who you want her to be. That's not a relationship. So when people start to realize why their relationships don't work is because they're not in relationships, it's quite eye-opening.
And so you think the best thing somebody can do is just continually work on themselves so that, whatever problems do arise in the relationship, it's not, jaded in any way?
Yeah, it's recognizing the pressure that we put on ourselves that then gets superimposed onto others, the judgment that we have on ourselves that then manifests as making other people wrong, right? I didn't get the memo from the universe that any one of us is in charge of how things should be and how anyone should act. But that's how people behave. Like they know how their spouse, boss, siblings, parents should act. So really? Oh, okay. I didn't get my marching orders of who meant to be in your life, right? You start to see the audacity of the ego's mindset that it knows how everybody should act. So when you start to see the absolute insanity of that, it breeds a lot more humility, and you start to realize, wait a minute, who am I? Who am I to say how other people should act? That immediately breeds a lot more love and acceptance and allows people to be who they are. Now, that doesn't mean we condone certain behavior. Of course, if someone's in an abusive, harmful relationship, then for sure you need to get out of that, seek counsel, get yourself in a safe place. But if you're the one perpetrating the wrong making and the judgment and the shame of another person, you know, then that's something to look at in terms of the audacity you have thinking you know how somebody else should act. That's not a relationship with another human being. That's a relationship with your own ideal of who someone should be. That's a fictitious relationship. That's why most relationships don't work. You're not in relationship with the people around you. You're in relationship with your own imagination about them.
And so how can somebody know if their relationship with themselves is on point and they're not having this imaginative relationship of what somebody else should be?
Because they'll find harmony wherever they go. They'll find kindness, they'll find forgiveness, they'll find connection and intimacy. And I mean, intimacy is an energetic experience, like where I feel really seen and heard and held by the people around me, and they equally feel the same from me. That's being in relationship versus fighting, judging, wrong making, arguing, screaming, getting angry, which is how most people live.
But like you said, there's also a difference between, somebody who's in an abusive relationship and a harmful relationship and they need to get out of it. One of the things that my audience has shared they struggle with at times is finding people around them that have like common values. Like you mentioned that, you told me before we recorded one of the main reasons that you've gone back to LA for some time is because of the community. You talked about like having good people in your life is important for people's, happiness and habits and stuff like that. So let's just say for the sake of this conversation, somebody has their incongruency with themselves. There's alignment there. They're not focusing on trying to make somebody they're not, but they want to make sure they're not wanting to do drugs, they stay away from people who aren't doing drugs. Like, how can people make sure that they're finding the right types of people in their life to elevate them and not bring them down?
It's tough, right? I mean, it's the old everyone's seen the meme of "Fuck around and find out," right? Like it's all a work in progress. We're all just sort of like, as I tell people, we're masterpieces and works in progress, right? So I I have friends that maybe I won't have in a year or two from now, but then I'll have new friends come into my life. And so it's really all an extension and a reflection of who we are. So again, uh, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I want to keep pointing people to the source of everything, which is if you want to be surrounded by amazing people that care about you, with people who are kind, who are loving, who accept you, who support you, who lift you up, then you have to be that person for yourself, right? That's the ultimate relationship that we're developing. So, in order to attract good partners, whether it be personally, romantic, professionally, whatever it is, we want to find that beautiful relationship with ourselves.
What's been something that you've been working on for yourself over the last 6 months to a year or so that's helped improve your own relationship with yourself?
All the above. I mean, everything that I just shared in terms of, I think when I have worked with so many high end performers in life, athletes, entertainers, billionaires, people who excel in their industry, right? Some of the best professional sports people, there tends to be this underlying constraint of expectation that once somebody gets really good at something, it's almost like inbuilt that that's what they're now expecting, right? So I take one of my baseball players who was the National League MVP, which is a big deal, right? Like, out of all the players to be the MVP. And the reason he got that a couple of seasons ago, I would say, is because he actually made space for his humanity. Instead of being the guy who's getting upset for striking out, which makes sense because you're being paid millions of dollars to not strike out. But I've yet to meet a player who doesn't, right? And they're the best in the world. So the reason for sharing that is, if I can share as humbly as possible, I feel like I'm one of the greatest performers of what I do, right? I'm not a baseball player, I'm not an NBA guy, I'm not an actor. But in my realm, in my industry, I get a lot of accolades. I get the best of the best seeking my counsel. So there's this underlying understanding that I'm really good at what I do. Now, within that, there is then the sort of potentially fatal flaw of thinking I should always be good at what I do, or Peter Crone should always be happy, or Peter Crone should always be free, or Peter Crone should always be pleasant. So, what I've been working on to answer your question is to realize that's just not a truth. I can be human. I can be hurt. I can be upset. I can second guess myself. And making space for that, ironically, makes me more, it enhances my capacity to help others. So the irony is, in allowing space for me not being the best at what I do, I become better at what I do because I allow for my humanity to be part of my vocation and my purpose.
How can somebody be comfortable when things are unfair in life and don't go their way? I mean, there's a lot of people that just stuff happens, it gets in their way, and it's easy to just get upset at the world because the reality is it's just not fair and it's very unfortunate. How can people respond to that?
I think again in words, right? Like I was orphaned by the age of 17. My mum died when I was 7. My dad went to work when I was 17, never came back. And I was an only child. And no one would begrudge me if I said that was totally unfair. No one. They'd be like, that's totally unfair. That's awful. But the expression unfair is the trap. It might be, like you said, unfortunate. It might be unexpected. It might be unpleasant. But I think if we live in the world, if it's unfair, now we're a victim. Now you're. So anytime we use dialogues or excuses to be a victim of anything, we're pushing ourselves into that black hole of the ego where there is no resolution. So I don't look at life as unfair. I look at life as it's just what it is. The unfairness is in our head. It's in our reaction. It's in our response. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean it's what we want. It doesn't mean that it's without challenges. But that at some level we could say is the beauty of life. Like we've signed up for a pretty cool game. Like if I put you in front of a TV screen with a joystick to play a video game, and all you had to do is your little character move from the left side of the screen, and you just move the joystick to the right, and you go across the right side of the screen, and then it goes, congratulations, you got to level 2. And you're like, okay. And then you go to the right again, and congratulations, level 3. And you're like, well, at what point am I going to face some fucking ghouls, demons, ghosts, or bad guys, right? Like this game is pretty fucking boring. Okay, well, same with life. Is it really unfair that we're being handed these quote unquote challenges, or is that part of us becoming a better player, right? Is that part of us becoming a better human where we evolve because we're facing adversity?
And that victim trap is really easy to fall into. And also the pessimism trap, where people just feel unhappy, miserable, cynical because of the way.
I'm more than familiar with it as a human. Yeah.
I know you talk a lot about acceptance of the human experience and just seeing things for what they are and self-awareness. Has there been anything that you found to be effective for yourself when you're feeling in that kind of, when you're feeling that way, to be able to get you in a more optimistic state of mind so that you can move forward and kind of work your way out of whatever victim trap you may have fallen into?
For sure. I think radical humility, that I've worked with, I don't know how many billionaires, I've worked with how many incredible athletes, and they all fuck up. They all fail. Their kids don't like them. A kid ends up in rehab. It's like shit goes wrong. And so humility to realize that it's not about perfecting our circumstances or ourselves, right? So for me, that's the first place. And then counsel, friends, people that love you, people that care, people who are willing to listen. Something that Peter Crone has had to work a lot on is asking for help. That was never a strength of mine. My conditioning was such that I was an only child, orphaned, forced into this view of being by myself, figure it out all by myself. So whilst it's allowed me to amass an incredible amount of capacity to deal with life and intelligence to be able to work myself out of most wet paper bags I find myself in, I'm learning to receive. I'm learning to ask for help. I'm learning to afford other people the opportunity to find value in making a difference in my life. The number of friends who of late have said, it's about fucking time. You've helped me for 20 years. I can't do shit for you. So, you know, I'm like, wow, I'm not much of a friend, So, we all rely on the capacity to be able to contribute and help others. So sometimes we think that we're going to be, an inconvenience or that we're a pain in the ass when we ask for help. But when you realize that actually people, humans, we love to make a difference. We love to be of service. So that's something that I for sure am learning to integrate, is to show vulnerability, to talk about my woes and let other people see, one, that I'm human, and two, it's okay, and three, let them to contribute. So when someone's in that space, radical humility, accept your humanity, it's okay. You're not the first person to feel like a loser, a failure, that life is pointless, that there's no meaning to life anymore. Like, wah wah wah, right? I get it. We've all been there. So it's okay. Then share with somebody. Obviously, somebody that is kind, loving, cares about you. You don't want to be sharing your vulnerabilities in front of people who want to cut you down. They'll use it as evidence against you. But then, in that sharing and seeing that you're held, that you're seen, that you're heard, it's incredible how the energy of apathy and hopelessness can dissipate very quickly.
Speaking of vulnerability and what you just shared, what would be something that it might surprise the listeners that you've asked for help for with, recently?
Oh gosh, so many things. I mean, mostly trying to think of late that would surprise somebody. Just in an intimate relationship, romantic relationship. Asking somebody to hear what I'm going through. Like, why does it feel like this person is unhappy or being mean or something, and it's confusing for me as a guy who's so sensitive, caring. Like, am I doing something wrong? Like questioning myself. So asking someone just to hear me out, and I'm always happy to look at myself. Maybe I'm not doing what that person wants me to do, or I don't know, but yeah, just to allow people to listen, contribute, and let me become a better man, a better partner, or a better mind coach, all the things that I aspire to be for the impact that I get to have on other people's lives.
Hey, thanks for sharing that. I mean, intimate relationships is something that we all struggle with, and it's definitely a dance, but having people in our corner that we can lean on, it's definitely helpful.
Yeah, I think they're the greatest catalyst for evolution, right? Because in an intimate relationship that's hopefully really heartfelt, where we do feel love with somebody, we become very vulnerable, but it's only through that vulnerability that we can access these deeper levels of our own constraints, right? Like with somebody on the street or someone in your DMs or comments on a post, and it's like, hey, you're a da da da, and you're so on. It's like, you might not enjoy it, but it doesn't hurt so much, right? But when it's your partner who is giving you the cold shoulder, or who's being angry, or making false accusations about your character, it hurts. It's like, that's hard.
Right. It is. And I think one of the hardest parts about intimate relationships is the unknown. Like, how is this going to work out? Am I going to spend the rest of my life with this person? If I don't spend the rest of my life with this person, what are they going to say about me? Who are they going to end up with, or whatever? And so many people struggle with this as a whole, and it leads them down this path of misery, unhappiness, lack of peace that we've been kind of talking about throughout this conversation. How can somebody get better at dealing with the unknown?
Oh, beautiful question. I mean, not too dissimilar to what I've been saying about the human disposition, which is it's it's part of the game. That's how I got to where I got to. I went through a breakup. A girl left me 20 something years ago, and it was sort of at the time, felt like the worst thing that happened. My fear of loss was very established early on when my parents died. And so I, in ways that I wasn't aware of, was always trying to hold on to this particular girlfriend because I was scared of loss. But that was the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And so I realized that, that was precisely what I needed to recognize that I had such a deep fear of loss. And it changed my whole conversation. I never lost anything. My parents died. I didn't lose them. That's a human way of contributing to this victim mindset. Like the question earlier about unfair. It's not unfair. It's difficult. It's unwanted. It's unfortunate, but it's not unfair. So likewise, I didn't lose this person. And so when I saw that, and the incessant questions I had in my head of, where is she? Is she dating someone else already? Will I see her again? Will I find love like that again? They would just keep me up at night, until one day I got the answer to all the questions. And it was the same answer for all of them, right? Where is she? Is she dating someone else? Will I see her again? Will I find love like that again? The answer was, I don't know. I don't know. That was the truth. I don't know where the she is. I don't know if she's dating someone else. I don't know if I'll see her again. I don't know. And at that moment, to come back to your question, I realized the very nature of life itself is uncertainty, and it's not going to change. The question is, how can we adjust? To what degree can we evolve to be okay with uncertainty? Because otherwise, people are like fighting life. Like, you've got two channels you can go down. Life is uncertain, is consistent. And then we, with our fears and inadequacies and insecurities, can always try to figure out what's going to happen, right? That's the rumination that people get started. Like, what about it? Like, it's never ending, it's exhausting. Or we can keep the consistent, which is life is uncertain, and I'm just going to trust. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to allow things to unfold. That goes back to your first question. How can I create my dream life in 30 days? Well, I don't know. I don't know what the fuck's going to happen. You might get the worst piece of news in 8 days, and then your 30-day plan is right. But if you stay in the present, if you stay in the flow of life unfolding, and you become in harmony with life, now you're onto something. It's not success in 30 days. It's perpetual success because I'm allowing things to be the way they are now.
And uncertainty is at the root of so many things. I mean, you talked about like stress management as being like a good habit somebody needs to learn. Uncertainty causes, anxiety, um, nervousness, worrying, all the things, and that can lead to other poor behaviors. And I know that like a big part of what you're going to say to me is, well, radical acceptance, finding harmony. But for a lot of people, it's just hard, especially when they're not used to it. Is there anything like, you work with people who are in super high pressure situations, whether it's the baseball player that, might have the at bat in the ninth inning with the game on the line and it's got to get the base hit, or the billionaire that's got to make the top level decision to move the company forward or whatever. How do you help them find harmony during moments where their nervous system is incredibly potentially dysregulated?
With one of my quotes, I will tell particularly my athletes, I say, if you're okay with every outcome, then you have nothing to fear.
I love that.
Doesn't mean it's easy, but Jack Nicklaus, greatest golfer of all time, surpasses even Tiger with his wins and accolades. He said one of the most important parts of winning is being okay losing. So instead of fighting our fear of a future that hasn't transpired yet, no one's scared of the unknown. They're scared of what their brain is putting in the unknown. Anxiety, yes, it's associated with uncertainty, but it's not uncertainty isn't the cause of anxiety. The anxiety is the byproduct of the thoughts that we're putting into an uncertain future, that I'm going to get fired, that I'm in trouble, that I'm not going to make it, that I'm going to die. But so we're being upset by our thoughts about the future, not the uncertainty of the future, right? So that's where, if we can be okay with all outcomes, not saying that's easy, then yeah, I might find out that I have cancer tomorrow. I might get run over by a car in a week. But if I sit here and think about it, I'm going to be in a state of fucking suffering. But if I'm okay with all outcomes, no matter what if this game of life isn't necessarily mine to control? I'm a co-creator. I do the best I can. I contribute as best as I can. I try to, somehow finesse things to go in my way. But what if it's all being handed to me? Can I be okay with that? That's peace. Because otherwise we're just fighting our own illusion of how we want it to be. But then again, I said, I didn't get the memo that you're in charge of how the universe is supposed to unfold. That's a lot of responsibility, first of all. I'd rather be okay with not knowing and doing the best I can to be in harmony with what happens.
Sticking with the relationship example and uncertainty, how can people get comfortable with the outcome? Like, so if the worst outcome of the relationship is doesn't work out, you break up, this other person finds and marries somebody, you're incredibly upset. How can somebody get to a place where they're okay with that outcome?
Again, I get it. I have so much compassion, and it's really hard just being human, because we're basically like little kids, right? So as a parent, do you have kids?
I don't, just a dog.
Okay, right. So, but even the dog could get anxious, right? Like, because you are the quote unquote leader, right? You're the alpha, you're the owner. So, like, as a parent, imagine they're taking their kid somewhere, but the kid doesn't know where they're going. And the kid could be scared for that reason. I don't want to go there, daddy. I don't want to go there, mommy. How many parents listening to this right now can relate to the fact that their kids get scared, they get hurt, they get upset because they don't know the bigger picture. But as the adult, as the parent, we know that taking them to school, even though they don't want to go there, is part of their evolution. And eventually they're going to make friends. Might take a couple of days, but then in a week, in 2 days, 2 weeks, they're going to be like, I can't wait to go to school because I'm going to see my friends. But to begin with, there was that sort of intrepidation. There was this feeling of like, fear, worry. So what if life is like the quintessential parent that is guiding us in ways that we resist? Like, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But life is like, no, I understand. But it'll all make sense. The person that you, quote unquote, left you and now they're married to somebody else, it might take a while, It could take months, might even take a couple of years, but then you meet somebody else who is 10x everything that you thought you had in your previous partner, right? We hear about this all the time. The person that got fired, laid off, and they're like, well, da, da, da. But then you see them 6 months later, and like, dude, I finally started my own company that I've been talking about for years, right? And that wouldn't have happened if I, right? So it's sort of this cause and effect game. So the ultimate word that I use, which is by no means easy to integrate, is trust. Trust that even in ways that we don't understand, that the events of our life as they unfold, even though they may seem like not what we want subjectively, are the nonetheless at some point going to be for our benefit. And that's not easy, but that's the only way. Otherwise, you're just perpetually fighting life.
And people will say, "But Peter, I wanna get rid of the pain right away. I wanna feel good right away," because I think people know that they'll find a better relationship, they'll find the better job, but they want it right now.
And but here's the irony: the urgency and the impatience is the catalyst for the pain. So meaning they don't want to feel pain is there, but I don't want to feel pain. I want to find love. I want to find money. I want to be secure. So it's the resistance again of what is that creates the suffering, not the pain itself. You're just having a feeling. You're sad. There's nothing inherently wrong with a feeling. It's just a feeling. I feel sad. I feel hopeless. Okay, that's cool. It's kind of beautiful. It's part of the human experience. Yeah, but I don't want to. Oh, now you're in suffering. So they can feel immediately a sense of relief, ironically, by allowing the feeling that they're saying they don't want.
Yeah, it's funny how things like that work out, right?
Yeah, that's the madness of being human. We're okay with joy. Oh, I love feeling happy. I love feeling positive. Okay, well, that's no different than a feeling of I don't feel happy and I feel sad and I feel pointless. It's a feeling. You, as a human being, you have this rich, like, gradient of emotions that we can all have. If you make space for all of them, then you're never in a state of suffering.
And I wish we could just change the relationship we have with our emotions, because a lot of our greatest transformations we make come out of these from negative emotions, come out of fear, come out of anger, come out of sadness, where we never want to feel a certain way again. We never want to date that certain type of person again, or whatever the example is. But somehow, whenever we feel those emotions, we're like, oh, this is an awful feeling. I got to get rid of it right away. When that's the very feeling that's actually going to be the catalyst for us making that change.
We wouldn't have half of the freaking love stories, whether they be songs, movies, books, if it weren't for the feelings that people have, that then inspire us. So is it really bad that somebody goes through a heartbreak, or is that the catalyst for inspiration for somebody else? So again, it's just making space for all of it. Like I said, with my athletes, if you're okay with every outcome, you've got nothing to fear.
When it comes to transformation or reprogramming the subconscious mind, how important is the story that we tell ourselves throughout the process?
Give me an example. So, what story would you be one might be telling themselves during the process?
I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be able to make it. I've failed so many times. Like, how important is it to shift that perspective throughout that process?
Got it. So the process really is about bringing awareness to those like deep subconscious constraints. So, in terms of your question, the story we tell ourselves during the process, it's more the story we're revealing during the process, right? So for me, life is revelatory, is what I say. So yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with one of my more popular quotes where life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. And so this is what we're wanting to do wherever we get triggered, wherever we get upset, wherever somebody says something that pisses us off or the circumstances of our life aren't the way we want them. That's what we're revealing are these I'm not enough, I'm not loved, I'm not safe. So they are, to me at least, these deep subconscious prisons. So once we reveal them, then we get to go to the next stage, which is one, kind of embrace them, love them. That's part of my humanity. Everybody's got them, right? I'm not such a freak that I think I'm not good enough. Everyone can relate to that. So profound acceptance. And then secondly, investigating really the validity of that statement. Like, is it an actual truth? Or is it the byproduct of certain things that transpired in my childhood, usually where my elder sibling got all the attention for being an academic or an athlete? And then, ipso facto, I decided, therefore, I'm less than. Right. So it's really just investigating these deep patterns and programs, wondering, checking, is that an actual truth? Is that really who I am? And then discovering really what's on the other side of that, which is total freedom, hence my main product and my membership program.
And I don't know if we talked about this before, we may have, but I think it's an important thing to kind of double down on, in that people have a hard time separating reality from truth, right? Like something that really happened to them in their childhood, or a mistake they actually made, versus what's being presented to themselves in the current moment. Like, what's the process like to be able to like authentically separate those two things, so that you can, I mean, not just suppress what may have happened to somebody in the past, but also not accept it as this permanent truth.
So I think we honor both, right? Like, so everybody's reality to them is invariably over time certainly becomes their truth. And we want to sort of just gently tease those apart and go, okay, I can honor your reality, but I'm not going to, condone the fact that you went through whatever you went through as something to dismiss. Like, no, people go through abhorrent things. There's atrocious events that transpire in people's childhoods for which we want to have a real deep sense of compassion and understanding. So that is a reality. What we want to be able to pry apart is the fact that, again, that to them means a truth about who they are because they were adopted. That's a reality, and that could be hard. And maybe the sort of family that they moved into wasn't, to begin with, very loving, and that's hard. So we can have compassion for that. But then does that mean what they might adopt as a, no pun intended, but as a subconscious pattern that they're not wanted because their biological family gave them up, right? We want to be able to uncollapse reality from the story that we are making reality mean fundamentally, and that's a delicate practice, and it's a very sensitive subject sometimes for people because certainly when there's real abuse, there's horrific things that happen to kids, and that can become very entrenched in their own perception of reality to the point that they'll actually defend it, which of course is what the ego does. Its imperative is to be right, even though what it's being right about is usually some inadequacy or insecurity, and you start to see the futility of that and go, oh, hang on a minute. Do I want to just keep being right about something that creates suffering, or do I want to be free? Right. So they're both there. It's real, and we honor that. But is it really true? And the true part is not the events, but the associated dialogue and narrative. And that's where there's some wiggle room. And that's ultimately where people can be liberated from the story, not the event, which is really powerful when you get it, because I used to think, well, we can have some say about our future, right? Like, oh, okay, I'm going to commit to this college, I'm going to try this business venture, I'm going to go to the gym and get in shape, and it looks like we can at some level be the authors of our own creation of our life. But no one would argue that, well, you can't do anything about your past. And I really believed that for a while. And what I now realize is, okay, you might not be able to change the events, but you can change the associated narrative and story, which by default actually means you change your history, which is very powerful. So again, not to condone the events, people go through abhorrent things, and I have all the love and compassion and patience to hear that and hold space for it. But I'm also committed to people being free from their history, which means that at some point, if they're committed to sort of liberation, they have to change the story that is defining them from their history.
Would you say that's the most difficult thing people deal with when you're coaching them regarding transforming themselves and kind of changing their mindset?
Yes, because our history, in terms of how our ego assimilates the events of our life, becomes who we are, right? It defines us. So the term I use, it's the you that you are for yourself, which might seem like weird language, but it's people talk about, oh, I've got limiting beliefs. Yes, that may be true, but those beliefs belong to the you that you are at a much deeper level. So it's like I'm asking people to literally let go of who they are. And that's the last frontier, right? Nobody wants to die, which is why I love this topic of death, even though it might be sort of dark for people, because it's really the death of the idea of yourself that no longer serves you, that is based in some sort of limiting language that's actually suffocating the potential of who you are as a being, which when people hear it that way, they're like, oh, well, holy shit, that sounds actually kind of inviting to die to this current limiting view of myself.
And I think human beings become like addicted to suffering in a really weird way, right? Where people go through traumatic events, they're having a hard time in life, and the thing that they want, I mean, and I'm just putting this very general, is they want happiness, meaning, fulfillment, connection in those times. the very thing they seek gives them the opposite: drugs, alcohol, pornography, toxic relationships, spending money on things they don't need. And that leads to even more suffering. Why do you think so many people do that when it's like the opposite of what they actually want?
To, reiterate the point I just made, the ego's imperative is to be right. Right. Like, again, one of my quotes is, being right is a poor man's version of self worth, because even though we continue to fulfill on the very limiting narratives that define us, at least we know and we're familiar with the discomfort of our own identity. Right, which is bonkers when you get it. It's like, "Oh, I knew that was too good to be true," or "This won't last." The things that people say sort of on the superficial level that justify why things in their life aren't the way that they want them, because at least they get to be right about the deeper narrative that I'm not good enough, no one loves me, I'm worthless. And so that's the insidious nature of the ego, is that it's by design a limited structure. It's based in what I call, sort of, again, may seem like strange language, but a negation of self, where I'm not something. So if, without sounding too poetic and esoteric, if who I am and who we all are at the essence of our true nature is boundless, timeless, limitless, like this beautiful soul, infinite being, well, then we live in these constraints, which is why we suffer, because they're based in a negation. So I am everything, but the way that I perceive myself is I'm not many things, right? So you've got the infinite looking through the lens of the finite language of how we've characterized ourselves, and we have all the evidence from our childhood to reinforce it. So then we get to be right. So then we, just like shining a light through a 35 millimeter film, you are going to get the projection of whatever's on that film on the screen. So likewise, the light, again, without sounding overly poetic, that is our nature, shining through the light of shining through the dialogues of our subconscious, gives rise to, quote unquote, what presents on the screen, which we call our life. So it's sort of physics, really. If I'm walking around thinking I'm not good enough, then I have to, at some level, create that existence, because otherwise there's this dissonance, right? Like, you don't wake up in the morning as Doug and walk in to brush your teeth or wash your face and see, this brunette woman in front of you, in the mirror. I mean, maybe behind you, if I don't know whatever went on that night, But if it's just you in the bathroom, that would be a bit disturbing. You're like, that doesn't look anything like me, right? So we have this sort of idea of ourselves that's very ingrained over decades. And as a result, we think, feel, act from that place, which gives rise to the results that are going to be commensurate with that. Which is why, again, people with all the best intentions in the world go and see experts who tell them to do different things or stop doing what they're doing. But that's so far downstream, because who they are gives rise to the way they think, feel prior to the actions they take. So if they don't change that deep code, then it's really just willpower to try and go against the grain of your current automatic conditioning, just by trying to do something that you don't do automatically. But if you can change the deep code at the subconscious level, then the actions you take are actually effortless.
I've heard you say that you kind of have to have compassion for that part of yourself that's oblivious to these parts or this perspective of your life or of your identity that you're not aware of, that could actually be the very thing that leads to your transformation or reprogramming yourself at a subconscious level. Like, what are some ways you think, some simple ways, I guess, if you will, that people can start to develop more self awareness around some of these subconscious patterns that are holding them back and creating this false narrative of how they're living their life?
I mean, the sort of obvious and not meaning to be flippant, but straightforward answer is just live life. Because wherever you go, there you are, and you are going to get triggered in the way that you're currently programmed or conditioned to be triggered, right? So the boss, the spouse, the kids, the parent, whoever it is that upsets you, is the opportunity to reveal these subconscious constraints. So you could sit at home and reflect and meditate and sit on the couch all day, but it's much more powerful to get out there in the world and see what pisses you off. And then, if you're willing to do the work, go, okay, what is it about that environment, that encounter, that comment that my brain is perceiving as a potential threat? Because That might seem like heavy language, but that's how the body is simulating that external data. Is that okay? Somebody said something or did something that I don't feel okay with. So it is really a state of fear that I can't be with whatever transpired. So what I'm actually saying to the world is I need things to be different in order for me to be okay. And that's the inquiry is okay, what is it about myself that is not able to be with the circumstance? Because again, unless it's, quote I use, I say, unless it's life threatening, it is just ego threatening. And so that's the opportunity for growth. Of course, if it's life threatening, great, get yourself out of that situation, that relationship, or whatever it is. Don't stay there. Right. But for the most part, 99.9999% of the time, it's really the identity that's being threatened and that is being triggered. And so, live life, you know, whilst most people have an avoidance tactic to things they don't like, meaning they don't talk to their parents, they don't engage with whoever it is that piss them off, they avoid someone at work. They are actually the teachers, right? Because if we're going to step into our bigger version of ourselves, more divine, more powerful, greater bandwidth to deal with life, then it's no different than going to the gym. Like you want to face whatever creates resistance so that you get stronger, right? If somebody's like one of my pro athletes, I'm not going to take them to the gym and hand them 2 5-pound dumbbells and ask them if they can bench press. They're like, well, what the hell are you doing? This is a waste of my time. There's no resistance, right? So in life, we tend to just be very strategic in the way that we want to obviously mitigate any sorrow, suffering, and frustration. So we tend to cut people out of our lives. And I'm not saying that, of course, if there's somebody who's really abusive, confrontational, hostile, angry towards you, yeah, sure, you make a healthy choice for yourself. But if it's the normal, mundane, first standard deviation of human interactions, then wherever you get triggered is a gift to see where you can establish a greater sense of freedom and power for yourself.
I think as people are living life, and this is based on my own experience as well, where you start to say things like, I keep attracting the same person, or why do I keep making the same mistake, or why does this same pattern continue to limit me in my professional career? And then so as you're living life, you're also telling yourself this story to keep us safe, like kind of as you've described. But a lot of people, they don't get past that. That becomes the same story. Like, I keep attracting the same ex because it's about them. I keep messing up in my career because my boss sucks, or whatever the narrative is. How what are some, I guess, some symptoms of somebody's life that the person needs to then take a deeper look and say, okay, I definitely have some work I need to do.
So it's by flipping the script, right? So everything that you just described is very much in the realm of victimhood, right? I feel the way I feel because of fill in the blank, my boss, my spouse, my parents, my whatever. So what that is where the brain, which is designed to predict and protect because of past traumas or trials and tribulations and failures, we're survival instinct animals where we want to avoid the repetition of something that hurt us. It's only, makes sense. But then what we're doing is we're saying I am at the effect of whatever's happening around me, which, as I said, is a victim mindset. So we want to be able to recognize, oh, hang on a minute. No, there's what's happening. And I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm not saying it's easy. And it's certainly usually not what you want. But you, us, one, is actually creating our experience based on our reaction to it. And it's normally a reaction, right? Which is a past based phenomenon versus responding to what's happening, which could be a present state. Okay, yes, this is not necessarily the most pleasant engagement or conversation, but I can respond in a mature, wise way versus if I react because it's familiar to the way my dad used to raise his voice and I was very scared as a kid. And now I feel intimidated by this person. That's where you're actually living from this old version of yourself that thinks that it is a victim of life. And actually, what we all are is victims of perspective, meaning the way that we interpret life. And some of the things in life are really freaking difficult to deal with. So people are like, yeah, but what about blah, some real extremes that people go through that is, as a collective, agreed upon as being a victim of an attack, of abuse, of whatever. I understand, but from the point of view of being an empowered soul who's having this journey that you've curated to be able to emancipate yourself from the constraints with which you arrived, you can only do that if you take full responsibility for whatever's transpiring. So that's the only way out is to realize, oh, I'm the one creating my experience based on the way that I'm interpreting life. and I'm attracting the circumstances to reveal those constraints so that I can break free, so that I do stop attracting the same partner. I do stop manifesting the same kind of middle management job where I'm not getting paid what I think I'm worth, because at the deepest level of my own identity, I have these beliefs or these conditioned narratives that make me feel somehow inadequate or insecure. Once I reconcile those, step out of that, then the circumstances of my life will automatically change, not because I'm trying to force anything.
And along these same lines, would you say that the idea of being right and our ego protecting us is at the root of self-sabotage?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't know. It's a component of it. The root is really the fact that you are that version of you, meaning that's how you relate to life because of how you've defined yourself. The self sabotage is really the byproduct of that, right? It's like picking up a red pen and you write on paper and then you get pissed off because it's not blue. It's like, well, you could say that I'm sabotaging. I wanted to write in red. Yes, but that's because you've got a pen, an identity that is conditioned and programmed a certain way, and so it's going to produce what it produces, right? So until you shift the way that you are and how you're defined by your own deep narratives, then your thoughts, feelings, actions, and consequently results aren't going to shift. So manifestation is such a buzzword, especially in spiritual circles, where people think it's incumbent upon them to do something and it's based in time, right? So it's up to me, it's out there in the future, and it's fundamentally, so that creates time and it's outside of me. And for me, manifestation is actually an inside job, which is, oh, if I want a certain outcome, can I manifest the quote unquote frequency without again sounding too esoteric, but how would I be? How would I feel if that outcome was already part of my life? There'd be a certain amount of relief or joy or passion or vitality or happiness. If I were that frequency, then I think, feel, and act differently, which is the precursor to the actual event matching the frequency that I'd already aligned with.
And I think one of the things that I relate to with this is, and the reason I brought up the self sabotage thing is we both love golf, the Open Championships this weekend, right? I know for me, if I get up to the tee and I already know that when I'm playing around certain people that I'm not going to beat them, for the round, I'm not going to be as good as them. I just like to go out and have a good time. But if I get up to the tee and I think to myself, I'm going to slice this ball, I know that once I slice it, I'm like, see, told you. And then I'm proving to myself that I'm right. Do you think that's a way of your mind kind of tricking you?
Yes, that goes back to what I said earlier about, like, the imperative is to be right, right? The being right is the poor man's version of self-worth, right? So it's where we grapple with any sense of inherent value. And in this case, the value we get is being right about something we actually don't want, which when you realize, it's pretty pathetic, right? It's human, so we have compassion, but it's like, oh, congratulations, you're being right about a shortcoming or an inadequacy. So what in this case of slicing a ball is really a reflection of your history that you don't want to happen, but is a tendency. And now your brain, before you've even hit the ball, is sort of predicting that outcome. So in order to give yourself a little bit of kind of a pat on the back, it's like, well, I'm predicting that based on my history, albeit that's incredibly unfulfilling. But at least if I tell everyone that's what I'm going to do, I kind of look good to some degree, even though I just lost my ball in the woods on the right.
Because the opposite kind of feels crappy, right? You're like, I'm going to hit this down the middle of the fairway. And then if you slice it, you feel like kind of ashamed, right? Because you're like, oh, I just publicly announced that I was going to do something. I didn't do it.
Right, because as human beings, I love the power of language. Obviously, that's what I traffic in, is words and all of these deep programs that people have based in really sound, like the words that we've inherited and the events of our life that trigger these different narratives. So when you declare something but it doesn't happen, how that hits us is that I'm not very powerful, because in the beginning there was the light, whatever it is in God's terms. And when light happens, it's like, holy, like, you said something and it happened, right? That's why I love the word abracadabra, which people associate obviously with magic. Well, we're magical beings, because as I speak, so I create, is the translation of abracadabra, which is pretty cool, right? That's what abracadabra in Hebrew, I believe, translates to, is as I speak, so I create. So if as we speak, we don't create, then it's sort of, there's this aberration in our ability to be powerful beings, and we feel a sense of inadequacy or shame. So once you realize that, we first have to clean up the spelling, the words that we've got in the way, right? So yes, you could say I'm going to hit this right down the middle, but if the deeper code and programming you have is like last time I played, I've pretty much sliced off every tee box. Well, that's also a form of magic, right? Because it's black magic, but you're holding on to a story still as I speak, so I create, that is way more profound than this sort of superficial hope that that's not going to happen. So, it's like a metaphor, an analogy. I say if somebody's got a house that is, perhaps a little bit moldy, the furniture's old, the carpet's all, and they really want to have an interior designer come in and do everything to make their house beautiful and something that they're proud of and they enjoy the space of. I could be that interior designer and I could show up with all the most beautiful lead-free paints and gorgeous furniture from Restoration Hardware that's super expensive or whatever. But I can't take it into the house. Why? Because there's already something there, right? So we want to first recognize, okay, what is present currently in the way that I'm defined by these limitations, insecurities, and inadequacies and a sense of scarcity, dissolve those by seeing they're not truths. Then we're left actually with a clean slate, which is like for an artist, a blank canvas. Then you can create on it, right? So if you cleaned up your history of fears of shanking and slicing and whatever it is, so that I don't know what's going to happen on this tee because I've taken lessons, I've worked on my external rotator cuffs or whatever, so my body can drop the club into a more shallow position and all the things that would be the precursor to maybe a nice baby draw. Oh, okay. Well, now I've got a new slate from which I can create. Otherwise, we are literally being defined by our history, which is that self-fulfilling prophecy. Even if you're on a tee box and you just spent $500 on a new driver that's not meant to slice.
Or like 50 bucks on a dozen golf balls that aren't meant to slice, right? Do you think it's harder for people to like reprogram their mindset if it's them that have made these mistakes over and over again versus something happening like kind of to them in their childhood with their family?
I think if there was a gradient of difficulty, yes, we could say if we are the evidence for our own shortcomings, then it becomes more convincing. I think a much bigger factor with regards to difficulty is age, right? Meaning the longer that we have had certain codes and programs in place, the more convincing and quote unquote, to go back to your question earlier about the distinction between real and true, the more true they seem because, well, now I've got not just, 16 years of evidence, I've got 46 years of evidence. So for sure I'm fucked up and nobody loves me, right? So the longer we live with the repetition of those particular outcomes, the more solid our perspective of life becomes, which we see in people's physiology, right? Like you look at a kid on a floor and they're in these pretzel positions with their knees and their elbows and they're sitting in all sorts of, what seems to an adult like really difficult and uncomfortable positions, but because they have this pliability in their body, which to me is also, yes, anatomically because of the age they're at, but it's also a reflection of the flexibility of their mind. So the older we get, the more stubborn we get, the more callous we get in our views, tends to be reflective in people's actual physiology. And now people get stiff and they sort of take on these positions like an old person, which is, where I've just become calcified in a particular view of life and my body's reflecting that. So stay nimble and flexible, my people.
I think about like one of my really good friends, and I know she won't mind me sharing this because we were talking about this last night, who's in her 50s, longtime drug addict, been sober, I think maybe for, maybe 9 years or so, but she's had a lot of trauma in sobriety, with relationship stuff. Both her parents died, her cat, who she was super close with, also died. And she feels kind of just stuck. And I think there's people that are listening to this or watching this that just feel the same way, kind of alluding to what you just said about they're at a certain age and they're like, I have all this programming. I don't want to be a victim, but I also know that like this is going to take a long time to unwind this. What do you say to somebody like that who's it's just at a place where they just feel like time's running out and their mindset is already essentially just permanent?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to answer your question, what I'd say is like I'm sending a lot of love and compassion and understanding, and I get it. Being human is no walk in the park, right? And so I would then follow that up and say, as much as I can have real sympathy for somebody's situation, especially like your friend, I would say, well, if you're 50, you could equally be only halfway through your life. Like, what are you committed to the second half of your life looking like? and lean into the possibility of something versus looking back at the failure of something, right? And that can just in of it itself just inspire a little bit more excitement, a little more sense of opportunity, a little bit more inspiration to take better actions, whether it be the way she takes care of herself, and to rather be defined by our history to start to be informed by a future that really would appeal to her. So if she wants a partner, how would she feel? How would she act if she met this Prince Charming, who was beautiful and kind and adored her? She would, just from what I just shared, if she's listening to this, which if she's a friend of yours, she probably will at some point, she might feel a lightness in her body. She might like, oh my God, that would be amazing. The shoulders drop. And it's like, well, already you just shifted your energy a little bit, right? And live from that place. So I often ask people, the question of what is the future that you're sort of stepping into, right? What are you committed to, both in terms of something you're consciously creating, but if this were the future that is coming your way, who would you be and how would you feel right now? And it's a complete reversal of how the brain tends to work, which is in linear time from a past into the present into some perceived future, which is really just an extension of the that we're really not that proud of, or we certainly want to try and avoid. Again, I like using my quotes because they help people. I say past hurt informs future fear. So wherever we've been hurt by things in our past, which, let's face it, who hasn't? We're human. We tend to superimpose that as though that's what's going to happen again, and we're now trying to avoid it, which is that self-fulfilling prophecy. Versus if you recognize the nature of life is complete uncertainty. That's when I started my career 25 years ago, is I discovered these three words of I don't know. And I had all these things that I was trying to figure out, like it was around a girlfriend. Am I going to see her again? Was she dating someone else? And what I realized was the actual truth to those questions was, I don't know. And I found peace with that, which immediately opened up everything that could be available to me versus the concern for what might happen that then I now try to either manipulate, navigate, or whatever. It's really subtle. I did a talk yesterday, my first sort of live event, which was epic, and such a beautiful crowd. I worked with 4 people in it, and so moving. And one girl was very, I mean, they were all very vulnerable and courageous about the things they're dealing with. But one girl said, her roommate, she took her to a yoga class and she was hoping that she'd have a good workout because, in her view, she's a big person. What does a big person mean? She's loud, a bit boisterous. And that reminded her of a parent who used to be a little overbearing. And so she was very subtly manipulating, hoping her roommate has a very good workout so she gets tired, which is really her avoiding the fear of a future, which is a reflection of the history that upset her. Does that make sense? And she's like, oh my God, no wonder I'm exhausted. So we manipulate life in a way that what we're actually trying to do is mitigate, reconcile, or avoid things that we still haven't accepted, versus recognizing, I don't know how my roommate's going to act. And more powerful than that, I'm okay with it. She's a human being. It might not be ideal if she's noisy and loud and a bit of a bully or whatever, but I don't need to control that if I'm at peace with myself, right? So hopefully that helps people to realize, oh, wow, if you can really, truly let your history be, understand the nature of life, which is we're all clueless. I have no idea what's going to happen. I didn't know you were going to ask that question. I don't know what's going to happen with the rest of my day. I have appointments and schedules, but I don't know what's going to transpire, what piece of random news, text, email I might get that would shift the course of my life. And so you stay open to, as I say, life surprising you, whilst, being responsible for what are you throwing into your history that is pretty unfulfilling and disempowering. Throwing into your future, which is disempowering and unfulfilling, based on the past that you're still trying to get away from.
If somebody's listening to this and they're looking to design their dream life in roughly 30 days, what do you think it would take?
I mean, I don't like to be flippant, but a complete reorientation of what they're trying to do. Meaning, gosh, it's beautiful, right? Yeah, even the question, it's so founded in this sort of aspirational quality that we have as a human being. Like, I want to create my dream life in 30 days. But what I think it omits and it tends to negate is the fact that that to me isn't life. Like, we as human beings are sort of wired to try and avoid adversity. We seek pleasure, we want to avoid pain. These are very mammalian, deep primal instincts. So whilst I would be a great cheerleader, if somebody wants to do that, I'd be like, good for you, go for it. And I don't want to be the guy that's, sort of the curmudgeon, but I just don't think I think they're digging in the wrong place, to use a quote that I steal from Raiders of the Lost Ark, when Indiana Jones discovered that the French archaeologist and all of his, thousands of workers and the big JCB diggers and, sort of corporate America looking for the Ark of the Covenant were digging in the wrong place, right? There sort of represents the ego that wants to have all the accolades, the attention, the fame, the riches. And whilst, again, I don't want to step on anyone's goals and aspirations, but life doesn't work like that. You need only look at your history as a human being, as a man, that we're going to have to face adversity. People are going to die. People are going to get sick. Money is going to be lost. Jobs are going to be, given up. And so whilst the 30 days dream life is beautiful to pursue, I think a much more powerful and dreamy life is to learn to find profound acceptance for the one we have. That to me is a much deeper interpretation of success. I've often said, to me, true success is being at peace. And what I hear in someone trying to create their dream life in 30 days is a lot of effort, is a lot of fatigue, a lot of trying to prove something. And I know it's a fine line, right? I'm not just saying like acceptance as though it's a form of resignation, but to what degree can we find enough humility as a human being to allow the events of life to unfold, but not be so upset by them, right? Versus trying to create this perfect circumstance.
When I asked the question, I guess I wasn't intending to say, okay, just for somebody to have the McMansion and to be driving the sports cars and be living on the beach. But I think that people, their dream in life is to find peace, fulfillment, meaning, and purpose. And there's a lot of people right now that don't have that. So if people are lacking peace in their life, they're lacking fulfillment and happiness. And like you said, sometimes we're digging in the wrong hole. Which hole do you think people should start digging into?
So right there, and I really get it. Like there's millions of people who are struggling. The last few years have been, tiring for everybody. There's definitely forces at play here that don't have humanity's best interests at heart. And in order to find peace, it is incumbent upon us to see where are we not allowing life to be the way it is. So fundamentally, the opposite of peace is resistance. It's fighting, like where we are in conflict with the circumstances of our life, right? And so for me, the way to have a dream life is to take a few deep breaths and discover within us where is there resistance to the way things are. Now, very subtle but important distinction is not to say that I want them the way they are. Like I don't want my parent to be struggling with a sickness or to be diagnosed with cancer. I don't want to be unemployed right now. I don't want to be struggling in my relationships. It's not to condone the circumstances, but can we just for now find profound acceptance for the fact that life is the way it is? So that to me is success. That to me is fulfillment. That is like, okay, for whatever reasons, and let's face it, we're all pretty clueless when we look at the big scheme of life. Things are the way they are. And the degree to which I resist them, I don't want it this way. It's sort of like an inner child tantrum, like, no, I don't want it, and that's where the mental sicknesses, the diseases come in, because we're literally fighting reality. So a dream life to me isn't, as you said, mansions and fast cars and da da da. A dream life is being at peace.
You talk about resistance, and I think a lot of people who maybe haven't done a lot of personal development work, maybe they're not, familiar with the subconscious mind and reprogramming and stuff. They're not even aware that they're creating resistance in their life based on their own beliefs or based on some of the habits that they might participate in on a regular basis. How can somebody develop self-awareness around some of these habits or resistances that they're creating on their own if they're not fully aware of it?
It's a great question. We only sort of have our life, right? So we only have our experience. We don't have the liberty of contrast. We can't go, okay, I'm going to just live on a different timeline as a different human being and see how that feels. So a lot of people just don't know what they don't know, like their form of resistance that somebody else might see very clearly for them is no, that's just normal. That's just me. The way to start to be aware of it is, first of all, people have to slow down. Everybody's in a hurry, as I tell people, everyone's in a hurry to get somewhere they're not, under the impression that that's where they're going to be happy. Even in the Declaration of Independence, right? It's the pursuit of happiness. There's this manic chase that people have of they're constantly trying to get somewhere. So if you feel that as a listener, if you feel like you're on the quintessential hamster wheel rat race of life, then chances are you're in a state of resistance. You're feeling that the life you have isn't the one you want. It's not the one you're supposed to have. It's not the one your parents said you should have. It's not the one your teachers or your friends say you should have. So wherever this is, this sort of fighting energy, then that's where we start to find some gold and go, okay, what is it that I, the person, am fundamentally resisting? Why do I believe things should be different? And that's where we can at least start the inquiry to these deeper subconscious patterns of thinking that I'm not enough, or I'm not safe, or I'm not loved, or I'm not wanted. It's usually some sort of not, NOT, that people are fighting.
And I want to talk about this the limiting belief, I'm not enough. I mean, you hear this a lot from people. I've definitely had this struggle over the years. I would imagine, in your life, you've had it at some point as well. And it holds us back in so many areas of our life, whether it's pursuing happiness, whether it's relationship stuff, relationship to ourself, fitness, money, whatever it is, purpose. How can somebody begin to like transform that limiting belief into something that empowers them?
Through the beauty of accepting our humanity, right? Which isn't an easy thing to do. One of my quotes is say, one of the hardest things to do as a human is to be human. And that's to realize that we all have that programming. We all have feelings of inadequacy. We all have feelings of self hatred. We all have self judgment. We all have a feeling of insecurity as it relates to our actual safety on the planet, which is being heightened right now. Whilst most people are trying to disprove it, deny it, overcome it, hide it, the actual access to freedom is to go, oh, that's just part of the programming of a human being, and to integrate it, accept it. Like we're not running around judging the shit out of ourselves for the fact that we have two arms. So it's part of the design of the anatomy of being a human. It's not like, fuck, I should have four. It's like, right. So we integrate it by virtue of the fact that that's common knowledge that you, as a human, assuming you don't have any genetic malformations and genetic mutations, that you have two arms. So likewise, when we look at our psyches, we look at our identities, our personalities, it's to realize, oh, just by virtue of being human, you are going to have a narrative that is founded in some form of I'm not enough. And that's okay. And when you really get it and you really integrate it, you no longer are driven by it. You're not trying to hide it. You're not trying to become a perfectionist to compensate. You're not trying to become a people pleaser as a strategic way of trying to be enough, right? All of the things, the mechanisms that people use as coping strategies start to fall by the wayside, and you're just not defined by it. It's like Peter Crone. When I was in college, my nickname was Perfect Pete, right? Which you can feel the pressure in that I felt, which was self-generated by the fact that I always had to get everything, back then kind of perfect, which was my way of compensating for my not enoughness. until I realized it was futile because there's no such thing as perfect. Everybody's flawed. And the degree to which we can embrace that about ourselves comes back to your original question, is the degree to which we get to live a dream life because we're no longer fighting who we are.
And so once we have this, seems like radical acceptance of us being human, like you just said, which is the gateway to improving our relationship with this limiting belief. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just deep rooted in people. I mean, you got people that grew up in traumatic situations. You got people that battled drug addiction for a long time that just self-destructed their life, and their feeling of not enough isn't just something that pops into their mind every once in a while. It's like deeply there given their track record. Is there, I guess staying on the theme of like having somebody design their quote unquote dream life in 30 days, finding peace, happiness, etc. Would there be like any kind of exercises or anything similar to that you would have somebody do to help like rewire that thought so it's not just, you're accepting it, but it's also like you're starting to believe it as well?
Yeah, it takes time, right? There's different ways that the subconscious gets its structure, the different dialogues that we have. Typically, the most common that people struggle with is what happens in childhood. We're very open. We're kind of like tape recorders. So we hear things as though it's factual. Like dad says, well, what happened? Why did you f up and get a D? Or, if it's a high school coach that you dropped the ball, literally, figuratively, and you feel like you messed up the team's record and you didn't get the win, or whatever it is that we all go through, we record those things as though they're factual, and that's who we are. So the first thing is, patience, kindness, forgiveness for oneself, which isn't easy, and to realize that, we have deep codes that are very primal. We want to belong. We want to be safe. We want to be loved as humans. That's how we survive. And that those things aren't easy just to, transcend or transform. So patience, kindness towards oneself, and then to realize that, we're all doing the best we can, and that these things tend to be blind spots, right? So to redesign, I like to use analogies like if I came into your house and I saw the way that everything was laid out, your furniture, your sofa, where the TV is, where the sideboard is, where your bookshelves are, whatever it is. And you could say, I want to design my dream home. So the first thing we have to do, as an analogy to what we're talking about mentally and emotionally, is we'd have to clean out everything that's in there, right? Like if I just bought in the most exquisite cloud couches from Restoration Hardware, they're 20 grand or whatever, and just bring them into your house right now, you're like, what the f are you doing? Like where the hell am I supposed to put this? There's no room, right? And so this is where people try to do affirmations, positive thinking, positive psychology, where they're like trying to repeat things, but it's what one of my friends who plays golf, and he made a putt for like a 7 or an 8 on a par 4, right? Not good. Like it was a triple bogey, but he made it. It was like a 50-foot putt. And people are like, oh my God, great putt. And he's like, yeah, whipped cream on shit, right? Like it's a great putt, but I still scored a 7, right? So likewise, if I bring in all of this great information, tips, how-tos, furniture in your house, but the house is still filled with moldy, old furniture, doesn't work, right? So to come back to the question, to make it as practical as I can, people first have to become aware of what is the dialogue that you currently have that is your quote unquote old furniture, and start to investigate the validity of that. Why do you think you're a piece of shit? Why do you think you're a failure? Why do you think you're not enough? Why do you think you're a loser? Why do you think that you're not worth anything? Right? And then it's hard to look at because it's uncomfortable, right? It hurts to feel those things. But in order to do the real healing and to design the perfect life or the dream life, we have to be responsible for what's already in the space, right? What do we and have we carried for usually 20, 30 years that isn't a truth, but it is nonetheless what defines us. So that's the tool, is self-awareness. What do I fundamentally think about who I am? And then question the truth about it. Is it really true, like an absolute truth, that I'm a loser? And when you really look at it, it's not a truth. It's how I feel. My dad said it all the time. My brothers picked on me. You know, you got the evidence for it, but it's not a truth.
So do you believe that affirmations are mostly BS?
I mean, BS is a strong word. I would say mostly not very helpful. You know, I think for some people, sure, it might give some transitory relief. It's sort of like the lift yourself up by your bootstraps, like you're a good person, you're a winner, like whatever people say. I just find that they tend to be short lived because until you deal with the underlying code, the deeper memories of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity, the deeper dialogues and narratives, again, it's back to whipped cream on shit. You know, it's like I'd rather get rid of the shit and then there's space for all the whipped cream in the world. The irony is when I get rid of the derogatory statements I have about myself, I tend to naturally feel at peace anyway.
You know, it seems obviously that these derogatory statements, some of these limiting beliefs are just poor habits that people need to not necessarily just get rid of, like, 'cause it's going to take time. They're going to need to work on them and understand them, gain some introspection on them. What are some other habits do you think there maybe are subtle that people aren't aware of that people need to break in order to find peace and live this dream life?
I think the worst habit is not so much an action, it's just a form of self narrative, right? Like, so the habits that people do, like whether it be overindulging in food, overindulging in narcotics, drugs, medication, drinking, weed, food, you know, what there's different means that people seek escape from their own suffering. Like that's the actions people are doing, but they're all secondary and tertiary. They're down the line relative to somebody's worst habit, which is the way they speak about themselves to themselves. So that's the habit to pay attention to is the consistent inner dialogue that is very derogatory, not flattering. And it's hard to really sit with that, right? Because we're so accustomed to thinking that the voice in my head is who I am versus listening to the voice in my head as though it's not me and get to know that person, right? And it breeds a lot of compassion. It's like, whoa, that person is so hard on themselves. That person has the worst image of themselves. That person is just so mean to themselves. Like, wow. So if you were listening to a friend of yours speak in the way that you speak to yourself, you'd be like, dude, what are you doing? You're beating the shit out of yourself. You're a good person, right? You'd have compassion, you'd have support, you'd have love. So you start to realize that we really are not very kind in the way that we speak to ourselves.
And so how do we break that habit? Because that's something that again is very subconscious.
It is, but through that's what I said. Unless you slow down enough to pay attention and listen, which is what some people don't do in their own relationships, right? They don't pay attention to their wife or their husband or their kids. That everybody's in a hurry to get somewhere. So that's why I came back to earlier saying we've got to slow down. Got to be able to pay attention and go, okay, sometimes it helps to take the thoughts we have and write them out so you can see them. Like it feels separate, right? If they're in our head, it feels like it's who I am. But if we take them out, put them on paper, and start to record what are at least the consistent thoughts, right? Because some thoughts come and go, some are pretty arbitrary, but there's usually some consistent things we say about ourselves. So to break the habit, we want to bring those consistent thoughts into our awareness. You share it with a loving friend, you put it on a piece of paper, you share it with a therapist, you talk to someone in a workshop, and then start to, as I said earlier, investigate the validity of the statements because it's not a truth, it's just how I feel. It's an opinion I have. And that's how we start to break the habit is because when you realize it's not true, you start to pay less attention. You're like, oh, hang on a minute. And then to make it more powerful, the question I ask people when I work them is, who could you be? Or who would you be in the absence of that statement or derogatory narrative? Because that now opens something up. People are like, wow, if I wasn't walking around thinking I'm a loser, if that wasn't there, I'd feel amazing, right? You see, it's like it naturally reveals something that we're trying to get to through affirmations or chasing this idealized future.
And I know for me and others, what's tended to trap us or myself from changing in situations like this, even though we've understood that, we're not quote unquote failures, is the reality that we see around us just doesn't reflect that. You have no money, your relationships are crap. You've broken the trust of every single person in your life. Maybe there's some legal stuff going on. And so you're like, yeah, I understand I'm not a failure, but my life is still crap. So do you think that somebody has to also improve their life, like make more money or improve relationships in order to bridge that gap between thinking they're a failure and realizing they're not?
Yeah, it's a little bit like I make the analogy of like a freeway and a side road, right? To me, the freeway with five lanes on either side versus the side street with one lane on either side, that represents the mind altering body and life, right? Like that's the real. Now, can you get your ass up, go to the gym, try and get a little motivated, maybe say a couple of affirmations, tidy out your garage, and feel better? For sure. For sure. These are important habits to, implement into our life, that we are taking care of our circumstances. You clean out your closet. I mean, there's a whole woman show on Netflix, Marie Kondo or whatever. Like, she's got millions of people helping them roll up t-shirts, right? And does that help? Yes. But the real treasure is in those 5 lanes, those 10 lanes of a highway, where it's the constant dialogue, because the relationships that suck, not having money, not having, your life together, having health issues, those are the byproducts of what's been going on for years in between the years, right? So it's your skin, like when somebody has a skin issue, whether it's psoriasis, eczema, acne, like people try to apply something externally, cortisols, whatever creams. But the issue is arising from inside the tissues, right? So until you change, in this case, diet, lifestyle, mindset, stress responses, your skin isn't going to look different. So, likewise, our life is an extension of us. And if our energy internally is in a state of dis-ease or disorder, dysfunction, then the world around us is going to reflect that. That's the good news, right? Because then we're like, okay, instead of being a victim of circumstance, I can see that my energy is the precursor and the creative force of my circumstances. Not like I'm at fault. We don't want to make ourselves guilty or shameful. That doesn't help. We go, okay, if my life is the way it is because of who I am, then by changing who I am, then my life will change automatically, versus me staying the same inadequate, insecure person who thinks they're a failure, but desperately trying to change my life. That's a futile battle.
I would imagine that some of the good habits people should instill are kind of opposite of what we've talked about. And you mentioned them a little bit, like slowing down, becoming aware of your thoughts, becoming aware of the narrative you're telling yourself, and working on that. I think that's a good practice to have for anybody, no matter what stage of life they're in. You mentioned diet, stress response, fitness, etc. What are some of the good habits you'd want to make sure somebody is instilling in themselves if they're a client of yours and they're trying to, transform their life in 30 days?
I think for sure having self-awareness to start, right? To start to recognize, what are your consistent thoughts? What are the words that come out of your mouth? Like, how many times have we heard friends say really, quite derogatory comments about themselves? Or, I'm such an idiot, I fucked up. Like, to pay attention to the words we use, because those words create our reality. So those for sure are key habits. But then just in terms of maintenance of being human, it's not easy, right? So consistent sleep cycles, try to get to bed at the same time every night, ideally before 10 p.m. If you get into 10 p.m. and beyond, you tend to get into a different cycle energetically. You're going to get second wind. You start to feel like motivated. You're hungry. Those sort of midnight snacks that happen. So try to get to bed at a consistent time. Try to watch the sunrise or light some of the sunlight in the morning to set your circadian rhythms. Move your body, right? Whether it's like you go for a walk, you do yoga, you do a HIIT training exercise, whatever floats your boat, but move your body, right? If you can, do some breath work. Start to get in tune with those subtle bodies. What happens when I'm really focused on my breathing? Some people prefer a form of meditation. Eat good food, chew your food, have good community. These are all the sort of the go-tos that everybody, I think, is pretty aware of. Of course, we don't always integrate them well. We don't keep them consistent. But I think the main ones are, good sleep hygiene in terms of what time you go to bed, the way that you sleep. You're not looking at your device until the minute you shut your eyes. You get up hopefully at a decent time in the morning and you move your body, get hydrated, eat good food, and as best as you can during the course of the day, do something that contributes to the benefit of society.
If somebody's feeling unhappy and they're looking to use this 30 days of finding peace in their life, designing their dream life to find ways to be like realistically happy, not having their happiness driven by money, status, etc. What are some of the like the cornerstones of happiness that people should focus on?
Well, when I write in quotes, I don't know how familiar you are with my work, but I'm doing my first book and I write in quotes. That's how my intel and distinctions come through me. And so the one around happiness that I am proud of, that people like, I say true happiness is the absence of the search for happiness. So it seems like paradoxical for some people because what I'm saying is similar to what I mentioned earlier. When we're okay with the way things are, that is the absence of the cert. We're not trying to perfect our circumstances. We're not trying to become someone. We're not trying to get somewhere. Then that to me is true happiness. That's peace. I'm at peace with the way things are. And capital A, I remain committed to whatever my goals and aspirations are. Peter Crone, despite my success, pretty healthy guy, good athlete, got good things in my life. There's so many things I'm exploring, but not from a place of lack, not from a place of there's something wrong with my life. So that happiness, no offense to whatever the 30-day, I don't know if you're doing a 30-day program or something, but it's like it's available right now. Happiness is not to be found at the end of 30 days. It's to be found instantaneously when you are in profound relationship to the way things are and not in resistance to the way things are.
I mean, I know we've talked about awareness, and I know that's a big part of your work. I'm just putting myself in a listener's shoes, and they're like, "All right, if happiness is the absence of the search for happiness, and I'm somebody that has just constantly searched for the next when I get this, I'll be happy. When I get the car, when I get the relationship, and that's just been this constant toxic cycle. How do they break free from that? Because I think that's a trap that's can be incredibly hard to get out of, especially because in the way our society is, there's so much value put on those things.
For sure. That is apparently what success looks like, right? And so we're all wired to think that the life we really want when it's going to be awesome is this sort of one day future. So again, it's just through logic and intelligence and realizing, wait, have you ever been in your future? Right? And it's like, of course, no one has. So you're chasing this perpetual horizon that keeps moving with you because whatever somebody's goals are, let's say they want to make $1 million and they do. Well, guess what? Now they want to make three, they want to make five. No, I need to make 10 because their lifestyle is going to adjust with them. The number of people who want help and support from them because they've made money or whatever it is in their life. So the same pressures apply. So it's a trap, right? To think that what we want is off in the future. And we, as cliche as it is, we're sort of forgetting the life that's right in front of our nose right now. And so the how is to one notice the lies that your success is in the future one day when to realize the part of you that thinks that what you want is going to give you happiness because look at your own life, like how many times did you think that when I got to whatever particular milestone that would be it, but you hit that milestone and it wasn't. Well, you got probably a bunch of evidence to show that your idea of what you think you have to get to, which you did get to with previous goals, doesn't reconcile your suffering. It just doesn't get rid of the resistance. So to see that the trap itself is what's perpetuating this pursuit of an idealized future that you never get to. So that's the first thing is just the awareness and go, oh my God, like I'm literally just chasing a horizon of my own creation.
And we've talked a lot about self, and I know a lot of your work revolves around reprogramming the self, improving the self. Again, I'm only just speaking from my own experience. When I've been the unhappiest with my life, it's been because I've been unhappy with myself. And it's not even that I'm chasing the wrong things. I'm just in a place where I just feel like I have a low level of self worth, self esteem. What do you think are some things that somebody could do other than, like we've talked about, the awareness around the thoughts and, not believing that you're destined to be failure and etc. What are some things somebody could do to really improve the way they feel about themselves?
So let me ask you, if you have you at any point had a friend, a loved one who felt pretty low about themselves?
For sure.
For sure, right? We all have. We've had stacks of friends who've gone through a breakup and they think life is pointless.